All right, Dave Angerinos, I have a special one for you today. One of my all-time favorite artists and one of the reasons why I really love comics. Special guest today is none other than Erik Larsen with, legendary runs on Amazing Spider-Man and Doom Patrol, but he goes on to form a little company called Image Comics and create a long-lasting creation in Savage Dragon. So without any further ado, I'm going to talk to Erik Larsen. Hey, Erik.
Hey, man.
How you doing?
I'm all right.
Good. Yeah, it's dark out already. I don't like these
No,
these
this
days.
not good.
I wanted to just say thank you for your time today, and we'll jump into it. Kind of start with a little bit of the beginning. About
All right.
160 miles north of where I am right now is a little town called Bellingham, Washington, and that's where I know you didn't completely grow up there, but that's where your comics life began, right?
To a degree, yeah. We kind of moved around a little bit. So we were up in Washington State up through fourth grade or so, and then we moved down to California to where I attended school in Mendocino. And I was there for 6 years, and then we were back up in Washington again. So
yeah,
back and forth, a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
And the lore goes that so your dad was a teacher, a professor, and he had a printing press, and that's where graphic fantasy comes about, right?
Yeah, he had a printing press because he was printing whatever handouts he would have for whatever classes he was teaching.
Mm-hmm. And with Al Harris and is it Casey Keyes?
Kevin Keyes.
Kevin. How did you meet them? Because that kind of fascinates me, especially being such a small, like Bellingham being this really nice small corner of Washington.
Uh-huh. There was a comic book store called Dr. Comics and Mr. Games.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what they had there was they had a little sort of an art gallery area that was just like a separate room. And it's like, hey, local artists, show your stuff. And one of the guys, Al Harris, had, I don't know how he ended up putting up his work there, or if he reached out to them or if they reached out to him, but he had his work there. So I went to whatever opening there was where he was showing some of his art, and I met him through that. And I don't remember if Kevin Keyes worked at the shop or if he just was a frequent hanger-on, but he was there as well. And we just got to be friends kind of through that shop. That was the connection there. And those guys were older than I was. I was a kid. I was 19, and Kevin was 33, and Al was 26 or 27 when graphic fantasy came out.
It's interesting because the Northwest, and I didn't grow up here. I grew up on Long Island, but I moved here to Washington about 10 years ago. But between the music scene in different ways, the zine scene is huge here, and obviously the comic scene is. And it's just interesting that to hear your story and know that Savage Dragon comes from this kind of. I mean, I know you created it when you were younger, but publishing it yourself, publishing it yourself. Is it something that you were just like, oh shit, I could do this? Like I can just put together a comic in my own house and print it out?
Yeah, I mean, we had the press.
Mm-hmm.
There was huge challenges in terms of printing it because I had not. While I had printed fanzines, I hadn't printed anything as big or ambitious as a comic book.
Yeah.
So I wasn't. There ended up being these real limitations, like the actual field that could take color was a certain dimension, and it wasn't big enough to be able to make a comic book cover that bled to the edges. So what I had to do on graphic fantasy was I had the color part way to one side. And
Mhm.
then actually the logo where it says Graphic Fantasy that was a separate thing. So is
So
that the original terrible
yeah.
one?
Yeah,
Oh my
this is the
God.
original. Yeah.
Yeah. So you see the logo where there's the straight line across and everything
Yeah.
above?
Yeah.
That was a separate plate
Uh-huh.
because all the rest of it was totally cranked down so that the ink could get on the lower part of it. And if you notice, like going through the logo right at the top, there'll be like a real skinny line that just
Yeah.
goes clear across the top.
Yep.
That was the edge of the paper plate that was still picking up a tiny bit of ink as it rolled across the page.
That's amazing. And I
So,
know oh, sorry.
so I had to do all sorts of things to try to minimize that line, which was, cranking the ink way down in that area. And then when I did that, then it made the top of the Prism logo too light, and it's just a nightmare. Also, I hadn't dealt much with printing before, so
Sure.
when I'm laying down the dot fields that make up the various colors, I wasn't accounting for the moire effect when you've got two separate bunches of color that are hitting each other. So
Yeah,
the
like in
dots on a Ironhawk's cape in particular really fade in and out of dark and light.
yeah,
And
you can
it's just
see all the
really
colors in there.
terrible looking effect. It doesn't have that on the reprints because those are like the Image recently reprinted those things and I
Mhm.
recolored it. And it's beautiful. It's like way better looking than that comic ever was.
Well, I mean, but that's the thing that's about self-published
Yeah,
and
no,
stuff
it's
like
part of its charm is that it's
yeah.
super homemade.
Yeah.
We were trying to get it done for a convention.
Mhm.
And so we had a definite deadline of it needs to be done by this date, come hell or high water. So we were up the night before the convention, printing those things and collating those things and stapling them. And then we didn't have quite it together enough to trim the copies.
Yeah.
So the first bunch that we brought to the convention were super ragged on the edge. There wasn't trimmed nicely to the shape of a comic book.
Mhm.
And they were also sticky because they were literally just printed. So they were just these sticky, horrible things we were trying to sell for $2.25.
And well, I love that you guys had the foresight too to sign them and number them, which kind of like adds to the factor of like finding one in the wild because
Yeah,
you know that they're not going to be fake, because they're signed from,
yeah,
third.
they're signed and numbered, and
Yeah.
you're
So,
just yeah. It was such a thing. Like we wanted to do 500 copies,
mhm.
but we were using paper plates, which fall apart quickly.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening is on some of the pages we were able to get a full 500. And
Mhm.
on some of them they had broken up by 300th issue, 304 or whatever. So on our first batch we signed and numbered them, one of 200 or one of 300, one of
Mhm.
those. And
It's
then the
200.
rest of it, we're like, oh, let's continue doing it. So it's like, so it's kind of a mess because there's people who are like, I don't understand. Why is this 2 of 300 and this one's 2 of 200? It doesn't make any sense to me.
I mean,
And
if
it,
you think
and it doesn't really.
well, if you think about it, it's on brand if we're talking about Savage Dragon because it starts as a miniseries and then restarts. So the numbering on that.
It was kind of a nightmare to do it, but you
Did
know,
you did you ever connect with anybody else in the, Washington area as, like people that were also self-publishing comics?
I didn't have any way of connecting with them. I didn't really know if they existed, where
Mhm.
in the world they would be.
Okay.
So it was whoever happened to be in Bellingham. And then uh, one of the friends ended up opening a comic store himself, Kevin Keyes, called The
Mhm.
Comics Place.
Oh, that's still in Bellingham.
That is still in Bellingham. It was since he ended up selling it to somebody else named Michael Goodson, and then Michael Goodson sold it to somebody else. But it still exists as a store, and it's gotten bigger and
It's
better
big.
than it was when it first started out.
Yeah, I've only been up there once to the store, but yeah, it's a great store. And like,
It's a pretty good store, yeah. Now,
yeah, yeah,
at the time, it was when it first initially started. It was a real hole in the wall,
mhm,
and then, but he would be selling our comic there when that existed, and then it also sold at King Arthur's bookstore,
mhm.
where we moved tons of copies through there,
Yeah,
and
they still circulate. I mean, it's obviously one of the hardest books to find in the last 40 years. But I think it's pretty interesting that between this issue and also Steve Galacci printing Albedo 2, you have two of the biggest independent characters in the last 40 years got their starts in Washington, technically.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I like the history. I like geographical history of comics is interesting to me, just because West Coast has its own characters, but then out east, New England is home to the Turtles, and those books rarely come out here, and so it's always interesting to me.
yeah.
Did you ever get involved doing any any other self-published stuff or any did you ever do any posters for any bands, local bands up in Bellingham or anything like that?
Uh, I know I'm sure I did a poster somewhere at some point, but I couldn't tell you for what that was all about or who that was for. Um, yeah, I briefly filled in at Whatcom Community College. They had some graphics person that was there, and they took off for a short while, and I filled in for them. So I was a warm body there, and I did all sorts of posters for different movies they were showing and stuff like that.
That's cool.
And then
Yeah.
I contributed a little bit to some other people who did fanzines, because what ended up happening is some people who bought graphic fantasy through the mail ended
Mhm.
up going, well, I want to do my own fanzine and I'm going to do this. And so I did a cover for somebody and a short story for somebody else. And
I was like keeping my eyes open for that stuff because it's it's just fascinating to me to see the stuff that comes before what I know. And
Mhm.
for example, I just found out maybe like 6 months ago, Colin Upton, who's a guy in Canada, used to do this little zine and then eventually was part of Fantagraphics. Todd gave him an image of the Three Stooges for his zine. And as far as I knew, I never knew that Todd had anything in a
Yeah.
self-published zine.
Yeah. Also, Robin Snyder of Steve Ditko fame. He
Mm,
published a lot of Steve's later work, and was at one point I don't know what his job was at DC Comics, but he was there at one point and was packaging stuff for Aardvark Vanaheim and
mhm.
for or Renegade, I guess it was, when he was doing stuff there. He ended up in Bellingham, Washington, and had some connections there. So when he was doing stuff at Renegade and he needed a page for this or needed somebody to leather that, I was happy to do it.
Yeah.
So if you ever run across any of his, Revolver or Murder
Mhm.
or any of those things, there'll be an occasional page by me. It's like, what the hell? It's just these weird little connections that are made.
I mean, comics is an endless well, so it's
Yeah.
good to know.
Well,
Moving
we were all super hungry and wanted to break into this business and wanted to work here. And it's like, look, whatever it takes, I want to
Yeah,
do something. Give me a break. I don't care if I'm doing a title page on murder for Renegade Press. I
yeah.
just, I just want my name to get out there, and I want the practice. I want to be able to get better.
I mean, that's and it shows when there's an artist that starts like that, especially with your career, that you never stopped. There was no point where you're like, I'm gonna shift gears to doing this. No, I'm gonna keep doing comics until I no longer am able to do comics.
So I'm an old man. I'm getting
By
there.
the by the way, happy belated birthday.
Well, thanks.
Yeah. Um, moving on to Megaton, how does that come about? Because that kind of bridges the gap where, I guess you
Well,
probably didn't
that
meet
was
Rob.
another case of a guy buying graphic fantasy through the mail,
Hmm.
because we had sent it out to various people at the Comics Buyer's Guide
Hmm.
and whatever other fanzines were out there. So I think we got a mention in the Comics Journal and in whatever else was there at the time.
Maybe
And
comics.
so a couple people bought my comic through there and then contacted me and said, we're looking for a warm body and we hear you're alive. So, uh, so that's how that came about. So Gary contacted me. We talked through a story. And he sent me some rough drawings of what he thought the character should look like. I uh, did something else entirely different, and then I drew the story, and so on and so forth.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, and
kind of how
then
that came about.
there's and Rob was in Megaton around the same time, right? So
A little bit later, a
a little
little
bit
bit
later.
later. So Rob's a few years younger than I am, and also that book never really came out on a super regular basis. I think there
Yeah.
was a couple years between issues 1 and 2, and some pretty big gaps between the issues. So it ended up being 8 issues over, I don't know, 5 years or 6 years, something. Like it barely came out, really.
And that
There
that
might have
just
been 2 issues that came out 2 months apart, and that would have been like cause for celebration. But mostly he was waiting on people to get their act together, and
sure.
they didn't. He was saying to me, years after the fact, uh, if I'd had my wits about me, I would have had you do everything. It's like I was the only guy who was actually getting work done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you'd have had me do just more of the stuff, those issues could have come out a little faster. But whatever.
Yeah.
I was
And that
young and hungry and looking to make a name for myself and
and he did. Uh,
work my way up the food chain.
and that just got a collection, like that just got the full collection release, right? This year?
Yeah. We just
Yeah.
came out with that, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
nice to
guess
have.
he's got enough material to do a volume 2, which would be entirely unpublished stuff. So he's got like several other Vanguard stories by some other artist, and some of those other characters had other things done.
Wow. I mean, I hope that gets released. I'd love to see that.
I'd like to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I do want to rewind a little bit because I know I've read and I've watched interviews that you talk about your dad had a comic collection that was bequeathed to you, was a lot of EC and Captain Marvel. But
Yeah.
but I want to know what was and if this is the book, because I know you've talked about it, was the Hulk 156 like was your first experience with getting a book for yourself?
I think it was, but then whenever I check on some of those timelines where they show you, hey, here's what came out this year and that year,
Hmm.
it may have been some other book. But the one that stuck in my brain was Hulk 156.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
and that for me was, oh, this is awesome, and comics are cool and everything else.
and
But
then
there was an early issue of Iron Man, which I don't have anymore and can't remember the issue number of. And then I know at one point that we had gotten a bunch of 80-page giants from some thrift store, because I was like, oh, you're selling all of them for a nickel each. Well, these ones are fatter than the other ones, so I want all these. Um, so there was that, and then my dad, because he was a Captain Marvel fan,
Mhm.
when Captain Marvel came back in Shazam #1, he came home with that. He was like, oh, he's back.
Yeah, right. Because that was the first time he was published, and was that the gap between the golden and the silver age?
Yeah, it was. I think the last Captain Marvel stuff was like 1953 or so, and then it came back 20 years later,
Yeah, which
roughly.
is it's crazy to think that you know, such an iconic character was not there for so long. But I guess was it a publication issue, like a legal
It
issue?
was, well, Fawcett, who is the original publisher,
Hmm.
they kind of went in and out of business. They had stopped in the 50s and then came back to do Dennis the Menace of all things for a few years in the 60s. Um, but yeah, they had kind of shut everything down when things weren't going so well. There was a lawsuit between DC Comics, who'd claimed that he was a ripoff of Superman.
Right.
They went back and forth on that. They may very well have won had they pursued it, but their sales on their books started lagging in the 50s, and their scramble to stay relevant was kind of sad to watch, because they tried to cash in on doing something like Mad Magazine and not doing a very good job of it, and trying to do horror and doing a very poor job of integrating horror into Captain Marvel. It was just like, this doesn't work, man.
So Trimpe, obviously, big influence on you. And then I have it over shoulder there. You got him to do the homage cover on 156 Savage Dragon. So you were looking a lot at his stuff, and obviously, you're unabashed Kirby fan, which who everybody should be. But when it came to EC, are there certain artists that kind of stick out for you? You're more a Jack Davis guy or Graham Ingalls, or who are you fascinated by?
I like Graham Ingalls. I like Jack Davis. Wally Wood is clearly a force to be reckoned with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were guys who I go, Al Fieldstein, he's no good. But kind of all the normal good guys that were there, and he had probably 3/4 of everything they put out, if not more, because it was really like when Weird Science came out, he was there from the first one onward, and same thing with Tales from the Crypt, and his Mad comics that was kind of spotty. He had issue 2 and then 6 and then some others kind of bopped around, but most of those things you just had them complete up until the Comics Code, and then he bought all the MD and psychoanalysis and all. He went all the way till the very end, and then when they stopped publishing, he was like, well, there's nothing for me here. So that was the end of his comics.
The postcode EC stuff is really weird.
It's so strange. It's just like, what were you thinking? Why would you think that this would work? But
they had their hands tied. It's such a strange.
They were. I mean, you had this coalition of people who went out of their way to essentially shut down the most popular comic book company at the time,
based off of one shitty doctor, therapist, whatever he was.
Yeah. Well, the thing was, when there was the Senate hearings, comics were exonerated, but the damage had been done in terms of the public and the public trust. So, Comics Code kind of had to come about. But some of the publishers would have a pledge inside of their comics about how goddamn wholesome they were, even before the Comics Code came along. Both Fawcett and I think DC Comics both had something in there saying, "Hey, we're children safe" and stuff like that. And clearly the Scrooge McDuck and all those other ones were perfectly acceptable fare for children.
Well, and the thing is, and I know I've heard you talk about him before, but I mean the greatest, most perfect cartoonist of all time, Barks, is, his stuff was wholesome, but at the same time, there's so many overlying themes in those stories. It's kind of hard to believe that people weren't seeing those for what they really were.
Yeah, but the thing is that a kid isn't going to get that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the beauty of some of this stuff, is that, if you show this stuff to a kid, they're not going to be oh my gosh, these allegories to Vietnam, they're not going to get any of that stuff at
Right.
all. They're just going to be entertained by whatever the story is.
Hmm.
And, and then as an older person, you're going to get the context and the subtext and all that other stuff and be like, oh man, these guys are deep.
Yeah, a lot of anti-capitalist stuff. I'm reading a lot of Barks right now, and it's some of the best comics I've ever read. I mean, it really is. And it just flows really well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm glad that people have turned me on to that. It's and Fantagraphics, thank them for putting it all out there in a beautiful way to
Yeah.
read it all.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's great. I wish that there was some kind of comprehensive thing for the Captain Marvel stuff, but
yeah,
it's such a mess. Uh, in terms of the way that they've gone about it, and the books themselves. The problem is that it doesn't start off awesome.
yeah,
So you kind of go, okay, well, Wiz number 2 is a solid origin story for this character, and then subsequent issues are kind of a little too silly or a little too weird.
mm,
And then when they expanded and added Captain Marvel's Adventures, they just farmed out the first 7 issues to basically anybody who could make comics.
yeah,
So, the first issue is Simon and Kirby, and which is like, that should be great, but they did the issue over a weekend, and it's super
oh,
simple stuff, and it's basically Captain Marvel gets in a fight. That fight goes on for a lot of pages, and then he beats the guy. Captain Marvel gets in another fight, and it's like, these are really, really dumb,
man,
empty-headed stories. And he's kind of doing CC Beck a little bit in that he's keeping the art open, and there's no cross-hatching or any of that. So
mhm,
it's kind of that style. And then George Tuska does a few
oh,
issues, and those are rotten. Those
yeah,
are like, he's not good yet, and he hadn't found his voice yet, and so there's some just incredibly poor drawing, and it's trying to be realistic, and those stories are super charmless.
oh,
So and then some of the early Captain Marvel stories that are in Wiz were really hit and miss, and it wasn't until Otto Bender came along and was just writing some great stuff that suddenly the book hit its stride.
hmm,
And it's like, well, how do we package this thing in a way that we can sell it? You kind of would need to go, let's do a best of, and
best
just
of,
go through there and just pick the good stuff and ignore the bad stuff. But collectors are like, oh, we want everything, and then why don't we have it from the beginning and show us all? Because the real early stuff is terrible, and you're
yeah,
going to start off and we're going to do 2 issues of terrible, and you're going to go, oh, Captain Marvel's terrible. I thought it was great.
well,
What happened to that?
I guess
So
guess what?
it's such a mess.
We'll have to clip this, send it to DC. DC, you need an Erik Larsen published Best of Captain Marvel omnibus right there. And
Yeah, no, there's some great stuff, and if they would just do, like, let's pick some good stories, put them at a bigger, kind of cooler size.
yeah,
Because another problem is with these guys republishing the Golden Age stuff. This Golden Age comics, the dimensions are different.
yeah, they're
Those
twice up.
pages, the physical printed book is wider
Hmm.
than modern comics, and so in order to print that bigger art in modern comics, they end up shrinking the art,
Hmm.
and then
It just gets
those
muddy.
pages get to be a little too dense, a little too muddy, and then you just look at them and go, "These, I don't understand why these were a hit at all. I don't
Yeah.
understand."
Well, I mean, that's a whole other discussion, and something I know you're pretty passionate about with modern, the way modern comics are published. We can
Yeah,
get into
well,
that. you know. But
There's
I
a lot to unpack there. Yeah.
yeah, a lot, especially these days with what's going on.
Oh,
But but jumping ahead to Marvel and you know your runs, well, you run on Punisher, but you run on Amazing Spider-Man. I actually made an interesting discovery today because I know that this is actually a fill-in issue you did, Amazing Spider-Man
yeah,
286.
that was a felon. I was doing the DN agents for Eclipse at that
Mhm.
time.
Okay.
So, and that was several years into the whole thing. And that Spider-Man is not my first Marvel comic in terms of when I drew it. It was my
Okay.
second one in terms of what I drew. Uh, Early on, when I had done the Megaton stuff and done some stuff for Americomics, AC Comics, I was
Mhm.
trying to gradually, slowly but surely, I was figuring out some of the things in terms of how to do just basic stuff, you know, because there's when you're young and making comics, you want to draw guys just kicking the crap out of each other, and that was my
Sure.
strength. Was that, uh, but having two people sitting at a table having a conversation with each other was almost impossible for me to draw. Uh, but so early on, I was doing stuff for AC Comics, and there was a lot more sitting at tables and talking than there was guys getting into fist fights.
Mhm.
So I learned a lot there. And then I met Jim Shooter at a convention, and we talked through doing a story, and it was a Hulk versus Thor story. And that
Right.
ended up being an inventory job that sat around for a few years before it finally saw print. But it gave me these great samples that I could show because it
Yeah.
was two known characters kicking the crap out of each other for 22 pages. And so that got me the Doom Patrol eventually, and
Mhm.
it got me DN Agents, and that Spider-Man story kind of came about right around that time too. And
We
that's just, we need a warm body. You're one. This needs to come out. So
well,
go, go. I
here's
should
the
have really
oh,
pursued it at that point, but I did not. I did not know better. I kind of was following the path of least resistance. And
mhm.
if somebody else was saying, we'll give you a regular gig, I was much more inclined to seek out that regular gig than be knocking on doors, you know.
Right.
So I took uh, Mike Gold over at DC was kind of championing my work and finding me fill-ins and stuff like that. So I did Teen Titans Spotlight, and I did a Secret Origin story, and I did an issue of the Teen Titans. I did an
Mhm.
issue of Superman, and a couple issues of the Outsiders. It was just, whatever you got, I'll do it. I'll do it. And then I got, on the Doom Patrol, and that was my first kind of regular, big time comic book gig. I did that for 10 issues, at
Wow.
which point I went from there to The Punisher.
Right. Right. But
Um,
that wasn't your thing. You weren't a big fan of cars and drawing stuff like that, right?
no, yeah, that was a very uncomfortable fit for me.
Yeah.
Um, but I got, whatever reference or magazines were needed to be able to pull out that sort of thing. So if he had a certain gun, I could draw that certain gun, but good Lord.
Well,
And it was much more, regular human being stuff where I was really wanting to have guys knock each other through walls.
which is what superhero comics should be for the
Yeah,
most part.
which is what I want,
Yeah.
And
Um,
I had pitched doing a Nova serial for
right.
Marvel Comics Presents. And when I was given the green light on that, I said, well, I got to take off from this Punisher thing because here's my chance to be a big writer
Mhm.
and artist. And so that was an uncomfortable goodbye. And then it turned out I couldn't do the Nova thing because they had big plans for him with the New Warriors, so that I was going to revive him in this. And then they're like, no, we can't do that. So I was like, holy crap, man. Just pulled the rug out from underneath me. What am I going to do now? But Terry Cavanaugh, who's the editor of Marvel Comics Presents, gave me a Excalibur serial.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that.
Terry Austin inked. And so it was unbelievably gorgeous once he was done with his part. And then that got me a fill-in on Spider-Man again.
And that's so the question I do have for you now with this, and there's the lore of Michael Golden having that one print that had the spaghetti webbing. But I opened this book up today and I'm going to show you. This is you did it before Todd did it.
Yeah, I mean, did it before Todd, but Steve Ditko had done it before all of us. So
that's right. That's right.
There's an early cover, I think. I want to say it's Spider-Man 19, but there's an early cover where he's got some pretty fat-looking webbing that's going over the logo. But yeah, I mean, I was just ripping off Michael Golden right there.
But it's interesting.
Yeah, well, there it is.
There it is. We like the lore kind of goes that print, inspired Todd, but
I'm sure that Todd was ripping off Arthur Adams and Michael Golden. Yeah. Just that's kind of the circle of life right there.
Of course,
Michael Golden would start it, and then Arthur Adams would continue it, and then Todd would take it from there.
It fascinates me because when I was a kid, and I was born in '79, so by the time I started seeing Art Adams' work, it would have been like the new Fantastic Four run he did with that lineup. But it surprised me how many people were looking at Adams, and you're all kind of like the same age. Like he's not that much older.
No, he's like the same age as me.
Yeah, and everybody was looking at his stuff so early on.
Everybody, there's a lot of Michael Golden influence in all of us, and I think we're all kind of going, this is the guy, but he wasn't everywhere. And Arthur had a couple of jobs that were in the works kind of forever, so that when they finally came out, it seemed like, oh my God, this guy is amazing. And look how fast he is. Because Longshot was coming out at this right around the same time that the New Mutants special came out and that X-Men annual. So it looked like, my God, this guy's doing just this incredible body of work. But I had that same kind of thing go on because I was working on The Punisher, and that was an editor. Carl Potts was the editor of that. And he was crazy deadline guy. Like, you got to have this stuff in way early, and we're on the ideal schedule. And if you're not making your deadlines, I'm going to pop somebody else in there and stuff like that. So I did 5 issues, and the last issue was a double size. And none of them were out. I had completed my run and was working on Marvel Comics Presents, which had something of a buffer.
Yeah.
And then I went from that to doing Spider-Man, and it was Punisher and Marvel Comics Presents and my fill-in issue of Spider-Man kind of were all coming out right around the same time. And it looked like, holy crap, this guy can really pound out the work, and look how different it is from each other. And it was just a situation of those guys all having staggered deadlines and stuff like that.
And you being hungry too is also
I was trying my best.
Yeah,
I mean I could pencil a book in about 3 weeks. So if I had the opportunity, if I would do something else, like, okay, I'm going to do my issue, but if I can do a fill in over here, I'll fill in that spot. So while I was on Amazing, I still did more stuff for Marvel Comics Presents. Yeah. And, whatever else. Because I was, still trying to figure this stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah. And you did
It's
that.
like at one point I was like, I want to learn how to ink. Never really got comfortable inking. So
Yeah.
I contacted Terry Kavanaugh and just said, what do you got, man? Just send me anything you got. I want to learn how to ink. And he sent me a 8-page Steve Ditko Human Torch story that I inked for Marvel Comics Presents.
Mm-hmm.
And I inked a Namor annual.
Oh, wow. I feel like I might remember that.
Yeah, over James Fry. And it was that was a super deadline thing too, where he was like, well, I've got 30 pages, but we've only got about 2 weeks. So how many do you want me to send you? And I'm like, send me all of them. I'm going in.
I mean, it's great. It kind of does, it's an testament also to the foothold that you got on the comics industry so quickly because of that. I mean, your work ethic, precedes you on that, and you were even doing fill-ins for Todd because he was doing what, bi-weekly on ASM?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. That's that when it got to be bi-weekly during the summer, that would just kill everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody who worked on the book. It's like, holy crap, now I have to do them in 2 weeks. God, I can't do it. But yeah, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
I did one of those issues, I think I did in 8 days at one point. It's like, gotta go.
Wow. And it's very strange. Like you and Todd are the reason why I have this appreciation for art all around, because it's like I'm 11, 12, 13 years old seeing this stuff for the first time, and it's blowing my young mind. And recently he was on did a live show, and he apologized for the stuff that he submitted during the ASM run. It was like this weird moment. And I'm like, no, you don't have to apologize for it. The two of you put down, 50 issues worth of just something that wasn't being done before and didn't look like anything. And, maybe I'm in the minority of people that like went on to love comics to a level of like, Sandman's my favorite, book of all time. And, I have appreciation for all this stuff, but and to know you guys were being worked, like you said, 8 days you put in an issue, and it's like all this stuff. And it's like some of the best stuff just comes out of the, the scramble,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is something about those crazy deadlines and just having to pound this stuff out. You don't have time to second guess or to rethink things. You just have to go with, first impulse. Do this, get it done, on to the next one. Now do that one. It's like, holy crap. You know, I've done that even, I mean, I think of it as recently, but it ends up being 23 years ago, where I was doing fill-ins on some Marvel stuff. I did a short run on Spider-Man and on Thor, and then I did some Defenders and Fantastic Four World's Greatest Comic Magazine, and it's like all those things were pounded out pretty goddamn quick, because it's like, gotta go.
Yeah. And that was like when they relaunched a lot of those titles. They were number ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, even before that and before Image, it was like you did those two Sinister Six stories, the one in ASM and the one in Spider-Man. It's like to this day, some of that stuff is the best Spider-Man imagery, period. And it's you were just crunching it. But
I'm not going to argue with you, but I mean, I don't think there's any artist who looks back at their old stuff and goes, wow, this is amazing. I think we all kind of look back at it and go, God, that nose, that's gonna drive me crazy till the grave. Or look at that broken hand or messed up shoulder or whatever. You can't help but look at your old work and see all the places where you fell a little short. But the fans look at it and they're just seeing the just energy that was in that stuff. It's just supercharged with passion and You know, it's
It
like
felt that way.
it may be crappy, but it's done with such conviction that you're just like, okay, I'm all in. I don't care if his arm's 6 inches too short.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like I'm not looking at superhero books even to this day when I look back, I'm not looking at like this is a reflection of real life. This is a fantasy. This is a
Yeah.
graphic fantasy.
Well, I
Um,
mean, it can't be anyway. There's so many different parts of it that you go, first, it's static images. It's not something that's moving.
right.
Secondly, real life, there's no black line defining the contours of anything.
That's
So
right.
when you're doing a comic books, you have to adjust your perspective on the
Mhm.
world. And you look outside and walk around and go, any of this would be impossible to actually draw and have be in a comic book, because there's just too many lines that would be too complex
Yeah.
to possibly be able to illustrate this. It's like just walking down the street. It's like, oh, there's all these bricks and there's all these windows and there's just too much visual information that can't possibly be in there. But
Right.
lines would get too close to one another, and it would just all jam together in this big, ugly wad. So you have to distill all this stuff down, and then once you've done that, it starts getting more and more stylized.
Hmm.
And some guys, it gets pretty far removed from anything even resembling reality. And then you got your guys who are like, no, this has to look real. It's like, okay, I can't look for that.
Yeah. They're like this, and going into the Image Comics thing, like the energy was the big thing. And you guys really did, for kids like me, it was like, oh, this is, I kind of often think, and I at some point I do want to talk to Rob and Todd, but the 80s into the 90s was all about the action movies, Arnold and Stallone and Van Damme and these guys that were just, it was big, it was explosive. And I think that's what Image Comics kind of represented for me, is just an extension of that, even hair metal and, the Guns N' Roses type stuff. It's like it was like a byproduct of that. Were you guys, is that something that maybe, subconsciously was influencing all of you guys
I'm
at the
sure
time?
every single thing you can imagine was influencing us, from
Yeah.
album covers to MTV to, you know, sneaker commercials,
Or Levi's commercials.
or whatever. I mean, Image's name is from that, Image is everything
Mhm.
slogan. So, it's all there. It's all being crammed in there. In, the 80s was that whole period where everybody had big hair and shoulder pads and
Yeah.
all that kind of crap. And so that's going to be reflected in the comics. We were all trying to outdo each other and you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Um, do you think that the kind of deadline crunch that you guys were dealing with in Marvel was kind of like the reason why, and it, not all the books suffered from it, but a lot of the early Image books suffered from being so late. Do you think that was kind of like everybody was so overworked coming out of Marvel that it was like a chance to kind of like pump the brakes, but some people pumped them a little too much?
there was a bit of that, and there was also, we want these books to be bigger, greater, more awesome than anything else. It's like
Mhm.
the first issue of Savage Dragon had a 27-page story, and the second one did too, and then the third one was 29 pages. It's like those could have been 4 issues instead of 3, and they
Right.
could have come out more frequently had I done that. But it was, I can do this. I can
Sure.
put as many pages as I want to, and I can make this the greatest comic book ever made. I want to give people a bigger, better, crazier, experience
Mhm.
reading this stuff. And and there was, no threat of, you're going to be fired if you don't get this issue out in time.
Right, right.
So there was a bit of that. And also keep in mind, none of us had started anything
Sure.
really. So, while X-Force was a first issue, it
Hmm.
was a continuation of things that had gone on prior to that,
Yeah.
as was the X-Men. And so none of these guys came in here going, I'm going to form a universe from the ground up.
Yeah.
Nobody had done that before. Nobody really, you read those early Image comics and nobody knew even how to start a story, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like you read Wildcats and you go, oh, this team is already together and they're already doing stuff and they just are getting a new team member in this first issue. Okay. The young blood
Like,
is off. They already had their teams together. They're just off doing whatever they're doing.
yeah.
But our early discussions were things like, okay, so who's going to be the president? It's like, we it's like we don't have any rules. There wasn't anything yet.
I
So
mean,
it's like,
it's
well,
great though.
if you're going to show a newscaster on TV, who's that going to be? And
Right.
what are the products that people are going to be using? What's that going to be? And everything else, there's a lot of just basic formula stuff. And then we wanted to have there be those connections that there were when you're at Marvel. So I
Yeah.
got to put a little bit of Spawn in here and a little bit of Youngblood in here and connect in with these other books a little bit so it feels like something of a universe.
Well, you singled out specifically have always been the guy that's like, okay, let's bring in this character, let's bring in that character. I mean, Hellboy and obviously Spawn and TMNT and Madman and Invincible and
Yeah,
you've
yeah,
had
yeah.
you've had countless team ups and it kind of made Savage Dragon feel like its own universe, even though it was in the Image universe. But I think
Mhm.
more than anybody, and you're we're fortunate that you are the only person to ever write, the Dragon book and draw it. So, it's this rare bird. It really
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
Um,
no, it's been fun for that.
what was that like getting the TMNT license into Image when Mirage? So that was at the end of Mirage, right? When the
Yeah,
Turtles Volume 3.
that was kind of a weird one because I was friends like with Michael Dooney. I
Hmm.
met him in through the mail. He had got Graphic Fantasy way, way, way back in the day, and
Hmm.
he wanted to self-publish his own thing, and so he started to do his own character called Gizmo that he was going to do. He had contacted Eastman and Laird at one point and said, "Hey, I want to do my own comic. Do you think I could trade for your comic when I do it? I'm self-publishing." And I guess Kevin and Pete wrote back to him and said, "Yeah, we both like one." And they sent him 2 copies of the first issue of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Wow.
And so since he got 2 of them, he was like, well, "I don't know what to do with the second copy." So he sent it to me. Um,
Score.
but I'd known him for a number of years, Michael Denny, and
Hmm.
so we had talked at we should do something together at some point. So once Image started, then that became that point where it's like, hey, you're over at Mirage
Yeah.
doing Turtle stuff. I'm over at Image. We can finally do a crossover. So it's really a crossover between 2 dudes.
Yeah.
And Mirage at that point, it wasn't like this big corporation or anything. It was just this kind of mom and pop operation.
Hmm.
So getting permission, it was essentially a handshake deal to be able to
Yeah.
use those characters. And so we did that crossover, and then we did another crossover year and a half later.
Hmm.
Um, and when Mirage was closing up, they, I guess, were looking for other people who would pick up the reins and run with it. And got a call from, I think Michael Dooney called me again and just was
Nice.
like, well, we've talked to a bunch of different people about continuing with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but we'd kind of like you to do it. And it wasn't even something where I had talked to them about it or entertained it at all.
They just volunteered you.
It's just I had used them in Savage Dragon, and they liked the way I had done whatever with their characters. So it was like, you're the guy. Like, okay.
You're the trusted ward of the Turtles at that point.
I mean, yeah, if I was to do it again, I probably would do something different. But at the time, it's like, okay.
Those books, as a collecting standpoint, are some of the hardest Turtles books to find. Technically, even harder to find than some of the Mirage stuff.
Well, especially the later ones. Towards the end, those are tough to get a hold of.
Yeah, low print run and all. Before we continue, I just want to make sure. Do you have a little more time, or
I didn't know if whatever. The dinner bell will ring at some point, and I'll just be like, "I'm out of here, man. Screw you."
Fair enough. Fair enough. If you end the interview that way, it'll be the greatest thing of all time. With Dragon, when was it the plan from the beginning, or at least an idea from the beginning, to tell it in real time?
Yeah. That was always my plan. I always wanted to do that. It's one of those ideas that people always suggest it with Marvel and DC characters. Mm-hmm. And it's usually like as you turn 30 and go, wait a minute, Superman's 29 and I'm 30. What's going on here? Somewhere around there, people decide, wouldn't it be cool if these characters grew up with me?
Yeah.
But people are always deciding, yes, it would be cool when you're 30 for that to happen. It would not be cool if they had been aging the whole time and you're coming in on it with, oh, look, it's Spider-Man's great grandchildren. How cool is that?
Yeah, and he's using a walker.
He's like, Peter's just 2 sheets to the wind. I mean, he started 61 years ago.
I know.
And he was essentially 17 when the book started. Mm-hmm. So, you're dealing with a guy who would be pushing 80. And then Superman started in 38?
Yeah.
And he was a seasoned reporter then. So it's like, how old even if you go, well, let's make him as young as possible and have him be like just out of college, 22. Even so, 22 and 38 is like, that's an old guy. He would be dead.
He would. I mean,
granted, he's Superman, but Lois would be long dead, and Jimmy Olsen would be a corpse.
Yeah, yeah. Wolverine's the only one you can make an excuse for because of the healing factor. It's
whatever. But it's, and you can only do that with so many characters. Otherwise, you got these characters keep getting bumped off or whatever. But I wanted to take up the challenge, and I kind of understood going into it, well, Marvel can't do this because they would be ruining their toys. And they don't have anybody who's creating new toys. They've just got people who are putting another coat of shellac on the old toys. So they're incapable of it. DC's incapable of it. But let's see how this might play out if somebody did something like that. Just as an experiment, how could this work? Would it work? What would work? What wouldn't work? What would be what are the downsides of doing this kind of storytelling? And there are definite downsides where, doing continued stories is difficult because then you go, I've got these 3 issues. They're continued right into each other. Now I've got to do an issue that covers 3 or 4 months worth of happenings for these
Yeah.
characters, or I've got to skip huge chunks of stuff. You know, if you've got a villain who's scheming, he's going to be sitting there scheming for months on end. And even, you know, even with kids and people having children, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, look at this kid I've got. He's got this adorable speech impediment, and he says these few words really funny. Isn't that cute? Well, how long does he have that speech impediment?
Yeah.
A month or two? So that means 2 issues of his comic, he's got the speech impediment, and then we're on to something else. So it's like, they're saying Dada for 1 issue, and then the next issue, they've already gone on to the next thing, and then you know, 10 issues later, they're having full conversations.
Do you keep? I mean, obviously, memory is a tricky thing. 31 years you've been doing Savage Dragon. Do you keep like a little reference, like say you need to go back and just double check that this character went through this or this character went through this? Do you have a reference guide for yourself?
There is a Savage Dragon wiki, which has all the characters. We even gave birth dates to a lot of them, so I can go there and go, oh, she's 7 now. She needs to be in this grade or that grade.
That's a great tool.
So that, yeah, there's a bit of that, and fans will come in there, and there's a few people who are pretty active on updating stuff, and I'll go in there and fix stuff and update stuff so that I can go, oh, okay, that character does have a middle name, and I can put that in there now. Like, I mean, and that sort of stuff does crop up where suddenly there'll be this new piece of information that's there, and you go, oh, I can update this.
Yeah.
These 2 characters have middle names. I gave 2 characters middle names in the latest issue. It's like, oh boy, time to update that. And they'll come in there and, okay, this character, this has happened to him since, and I need to update what issues that character has appeared in.
I mean, Dragon it's an island unto itself, because not only do you have a very active, fan community, but you have a letters column that's 3 pages, sometimes 4 pages long, which you don't see that much anymore. You have the backup stories. I mean, it's very interesting to know that, like, I would never have thought in 1992 that this book would go on to be like the kind of like a love letter to comics, as well as being a great comic, and that, people still care about. And you have, I guess, for lack of a better term, a cult following. Is it something that, yeah, is it something that, like, did you think this was kind of how it was going to shake out 30 years later? I mean, did you see it at all, even 5 years in?
Oh, well, I'd hope so. You go into it thinking, all right, well, I'm all in. I kind of had in the back of my head, when I was getting into comics in the first place, been like, okay, well, if I ever do a Dragon comic, I'm doing this till the end of my career. And that was just what I had thought. But you don't know, it's like,
of course,
how long is the rest of your career going to be? And when we started Image, I kind of was hesitant to even do Savage Dragon, because I thought, I don't want to start the rest of my career now. I'm still in my 20s.
Yeah.
But here I am.
Yeah. I mean, you went back to Marvel, and you've done some stuff with them, and I guess that's one of those things. It's like, I think you had talked about doing something soon with them, but I don't know if that was a rumor, if I heard it.
I just did a 10-page story that I don't even know when the hell it's going to show up, or I don't think it's a book they've even announced yet. So I don't really see anything about it.
Fair enough.
It's putting me in a weird spot where I'm like, so can I not sell this original art? Because it's
that's right,
from some book that's not out and hasn't been announced.
And it has no name and we can't talk about it, but
Yeah,
eventually we
right. It's
will.
like, what am
Yeah.
I supposed to do here? Uh,
um, but jumping back to 2004 is when you had your stint as publisher at Image, correct? Was it around
I'm
then?
gonna say yes. I don't remember the dates.
So it's interesting because in my comic life, the 97 to like 2000, I don't think I read anything new. It's actually kind of when I went back and discovered Alan Moore and Frank Miller and Gaiman and all this stuff that my
Mhm,
friend just shoved in front of me. And I'm like, oh, but then 2000 and around when you took, and I know Kirkman comes in when Jim was still the publisher, but
mhm.
that was, I mean, I look at that time, 2003, 2004, Walking Dead takes off, Invincible takes off. Comics, it takes a whole new life then. And what was that like, from a publishing standpoint when, Walking Dead takes off and brings this whole new life into Image Comics that, at least for an outsider's perspective, wasn't there?
I mean, good for him. Good for us. It was a good time. It was
Yeah.
just to be able to have a strong example of something that works.
Yeah.
Uh, really helped to be able to draw more folks to Image Comics. And plus, being the publisher, there was a lot of kind of going back and forth with different creators and trying
Mhm.
to kind of massage their ideas a bit so that
Yeah.
uh, they could be more successful. Like the Luna brothers had pitched a book
Yeah.
called Heroine,
That's
which
right.
was about this female hero, female superhero, and I was like, you can't call it that because I mean I realize the two words are spelled different.
Sure.
People
But
aren't that smart. They're
well,
just not.
when you go into a comic book store and the guy's like, "Have you tried heroin yet?" It doesn't work. It
Yeah,
doesn't work.
I want heroin. I'm looking for heroin. Like, okay.
Was that what eventually became Girls, I guess? Or The Sword?
That was their first book, which was Ultra.
Ultra. Oh yeah, that's right. Ultra. Man,
So that was their very first title. And
those
then
sounds
during the
good.
time that I was publisher, I think Jonathan Hickman did his first book, which was the Nightly News,
Mhm.
and that sort of started his career. Um, so those were the two guys, and I guess Kirkman too, who submitted their work blind,
Yeah.
where you just sent it to the publisher and said, "Hey, how about me?" And then we took a shot on them, and they became something. Kirkman
Yeah.
was a little circuitous in terms of how he got in because he
He's the
wanted to do something. Uh, Valentino wasn't really having it. So Robert and I did a mini series together uh, called Super Patriot.
Mhm.
We did the third Super Patriot miniseries together, and he and Corey Walker had done that, and that was kind of the proving ground for Invincible.
Yeah.
So they did that, and it was like, okay, well, I'll take a chance on you guys because you've done this thing. It did reasonably well. You guys made your deadlines. I'm going to trust you on this. And so then Invincible was able to kind of come out of that. And then Walking Dead was, okay, well, you've done this other book, so we're going to trust you on this one too.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, well, it worked out.
yeah, it worked out, and that was the thing, is trying to say to people, yes, Image has done some superhero stuff early on, but you don't have to do superheroes. But there are some things you need to do, and we would like you to do.
Mhm.
And part of that is, let's choose some titles that are easy to, first let's get some logos that are readable,
Yeah.
and let's choose titles that are pronounceable.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, that's a big one. Let's start I know that this is creator owned stuff and you're supposed to be able to do whatever the hell you want to, but how about we bat around some cover sketches so that you're not putting in something that is just a mad scramble from when you're looking at a newsstand, because
Mm-hmm.
you want to be able to look at a comic book cover from across the room and be able to identify what the hell's going on that book.
Yeah.
You know, because if it's just, hey, here's a beehive of information where all these characters are just mixing it up, it's like, oh, cool drawing if it's 3 inches away from my face, but
Yeah.
if I'm walking into a store and you've, you know, got this incomprehensible thing over there that's not necessarily going to go jumping off the racks and into somebody's hand.
Yeah. And
So that was part of it, was just trying to get that sort of thing done, and trying to get some of those books to be a little bit sounder conceptually. There was, I was doing a lot of sketching of other people's characters that you didn't see behind the scenes,
yeah.
and helping to design logos that you didn't see behind the scenes, and talking people off the edge of doing their fly fishing comics or whatever, because there's just what you don't want is for somebody who's been working at Marvel for 20 years to go, okay, I'm finally going to break out and I'm going to go and I'm going to do a project on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's a huge failure. And then they just go back to doing whatever on their own again, because at Marvel or DC again, because boy, it was a huge failure. And it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't have called it whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
you see these psychoanalysis was a poor title choice.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I guess it's just a good sign, knowing that you were the guy helping out, it worked. I mean, I look at Image at that like point in around
I
2003.
also, and I hate to say this out loud, but I did have people say to me, I just didn't, my ego couldn't take being turned down by Jim Valentino. It's just like, I mean, I don't want to be, that does seem like a really shitty thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, oh man.
I appreciate you being honest. It's one of the things.
I love the guy, but
yeah,
it's
one of the things that
I think there is the impression that of the artists who went and started Image Comics, his work wasn't the strongest of the lot, So it's like, oh, 6 of the greatest artists in comics and Jim Valentino. It's like, okay.
Well, for my part, I didn't know Guardians of the Galaxy at that point. That wasn't a book that I had ever looked at in my life, at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't one of the top sellers of the company, but it was a strong enough title that it continued for a good long time. And it did have, faithful readers who had been following it the whole time, clearly he had something of an audience, but it wasn't an X-Force size audience, and it wasn't Amazing Spider-Man or Spider-Man size audience. It was a strong, dependable, solid book,
Almost like maybe even you could say it's like a cult following. I mean, the Guardians, even when that became a movie, it wasn't going to be this big thing. And then all of a sudden turns out to be one of the biggest movies that Marvel had put out at that point. So
yeah,
it's the underdog thing.
sometimes it works, the
Yeah.
right casting and the right everything else.
Yeah.
In terms of the comics themselves, Iron Man was never a great comic book, and then it turns out, having that as the basis of a movie turns out to be pretty good.
Yeah.
Like, you can deviate from the comics more in something like that without upsetting your fan base than you can on something like Spider-Man, where organic webs, no.
Yeah, you can't do that. It goes against everything. It's like, well, it's fiction, so
you guys suck. Whereas if you mess with Whiplash and change him up, people are going to be like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't even know who Whiplash is.
Me neither. I didn't know.
What do I
either.
care if you give him a different costume? Whereas making the Rhino look different, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? You idiots.
But it's really funny, like just on that for a little bit. If you look at and Rhino wasn't Ditko, that was Ramita. But if you look at the way that, and I said this to Jim Rugg when we had the last chat, when you look at Ditko's the Rogues Gallery that he created, right, for Amazing Spider-Man, they all look wild. They all look so weird. Like Lizard looks like an old man that doesn't have teeth. And, Doc Ock looks like I could take this guy in 3 seconds. And so when I see people getting all bent out of shape and, they changed this, they changed that, I'm like, go look at what it started as. And then look at where it was 30 years later. It's wildly different,
Well, even like take the Rhino. The Rhino and Scorpion visually aren't that different from each other. Conceptually and visually, they're like, it's kind of a rhinoceros with a little hole
face.
of a human face, and the Scorpion is kind of a scorpion with a little bit of a human face poking out of there.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, you're like, all right, what other animals are cool? What do we got?
Right. Tiger.
A kangaroo? Okay, let's do him.
Whatever a gibbon is. I don't know what a gibbon is in real life. I don't know.
Don't even care. Here's something.
But going back to Dragon, and what I really appreciate, and I don't know if you can see it up there, but I got the Savage Dragon funnies. You probably can't see it, but when I discovered that, I'm like, oh, this is great. It's Erik letting everybody play in the sandbox, and I always enjoy that, seeing these other people come in and do these cartoony things with Dragon, or it's just it just feels like this character could literally outlive everybody if people just kind of keep that legacy going 70 years from now. But is it something, and I don't remember when it started, but what was the first time you were like kind of like, all right, you can play around with this character? Was it that book?
In terms of that, I let people use him in their books as soon as Image was even a thing.
Right.
It's like, you want him to show up? Okay, whatever. You're going to make him 9 feet tall? Okay, whatever. I'm kind of going with him being 5'10" in my book, but if you want to make him 9 feet tall, okay.
See, that way nobody can be mad. Nobody.
Well, at a certain point, I just decided that Image continuity should basically be every book is its own world.
Mm-hmm.
And where those characters cross over is where those worlds converge. But if I'm reading Wildcats and Dragon shows up in it, that's kind of from the Wildcats point of view. It's like I'm listening to a story being told to me by one of those characters. Zealot is telling me about it. It's like, oh, he's 9 feet tall. Really? All right. Whereas if it's in my comic, it's like, oh, he'll look perfectly right.
Right. He's going to be the height.
But I'm going to get something wrong on your dude for sure, because I'm not going to read it. You want me to actually read your comic? Okay, forget it.
Um, on other things like have Herculean and the Kung Fu Bible stories. That Where does the Kung Fu Bible stories come from? It's you and Bruce Timm get together with the editing of
Yeah,
it, and I mean I laughed my ass off reading that. I absolutely
that
loved it.
is it's a cool book. Um, we always liked Treasury editions,
Hmm.
and there were several super cool Treasury editions that had come out when we were kids, and so
Yeah.
me and Bruce, we're coming up in the '70s. So one of them is there was an adaptation of the Bible which was laid out by Joe Kubert and finished by
Right.
Nestor Redondo, and it was
Yeah.
just one of the most gorgeous treasure editions ever. It's just unbelievably beautiful.
Hmm.
And then there was some kung fu one. They did a kung fu treasure edition that like Herb Trimpe did some new art for, and it was just kind of a bunch of different kung fu stories that are all tossed together in this treasure edition. And there's so that's kind of where the name comes from. Is
Yeah.
for lack of a better title, we would just have that as our working title. And then when it came down to doing the making it into an actual book, it's like, oh, let's just use that. We don't have anything better.
That's
But
great though. And,
but
you
it's
know,
definitely one of those that uh, I think some people were like, I don't know what this means. Why is this called what it is?
well, your sixth sense of humor kind of shines through
Yeah.
with
Well,
stuff like
there's
that.
a lot of callbacks in it in terms of we got to make it designed to look like the Marvel Treasury Edition, so it's got their same kind of trade dress that was going
Yeah.
on, and then the uh, um, Baron Delgado did the logo, and he was kind of doing Gaspar
Hmm.
for the logo, who's one of those letterers that was doing a lot of the DC stuff.
Hmm.
And then he lettered my story in there as kind of doing an Artie Simek kind of thing because I always loved his lettering. And
Yeah.
then the back cover of it is very similar to the back cover of this first Spider-Man Treasury Edition. So there's a bunch of like different things that are
Oh
kind of
yeah.
kind of reminiscent of. I think that thing at the top was kind of what was on the first Spider-Man one, and we were just looking at various treasury editions and how they had done it and being like,
Hmm.
all right, well, let's take this bit from this and this bit from that and
Yeah. Man, and it's a murderer's
make
row.
it
I
make
mean,
it yeah, no,
you,
and it sold zero copies. It sold
yeah,
absolutely just nothing.
I've heard you say that before.
We ended up the sell through on it was terrible, and we ended up destroying a bunch of the copies of it because it was like we had overprinted on it, and
Mm,
it's like you're paying for storage on all this stuff. So it's like, all right.
that's a
So
heartbreaker.
it's really too bad that it didn't
Yeah.
do better than it did. I mean, a bunch of those things, you
Yeah.
just were like, I really want this giant, the next issue project. I would have liked those books to have been more successful than they were. But
Yeah.
it's like, all right, we got 3 issues out of there, so
I think,
that's something.
yeah. I wish treasuries were still a thing because, when I find them, they're just fascinating to look through. I mean, the
Yeah.
2001 adaptation treasury is like one of the most beautiful Jack Kirby things I've ever seen.
Mhm.
And then there's like
Well,
the House of Mystery ones with the Adams and the Wrights and stuff. Unbelievable to see that.
yeah, the thing with those is the Treasury edition, the dimensions are off from a standard comic. So you
Yeah.
can't just take a standard comic, blow it up, and call it a Treasury edition. Because what ends up happening is the standard comic book page is too tall and not,
Mhm.
you know. So when they were reprinting stories, they had to cut an inch out of all of the pages, and so when you go through those and look at all the ones that are reprints, they're stripping off a little bit of some of those panels and pushing things
Yeah.
down in order to make them work. Like page ones are all fine because they've all got the indicias that they can just strip off, and
Yeah.
it's fine. But subsequent pages in there, they've all got to do all this adjusting everywhere, and then they got to recolor it all. And so
Becomes a project.
yeah, it just becomes something of an ordeal. 2001 was drawn for that size,
Right.
as was Captain America's Bicentennial Battles. It was
Yeah, that's
also
a
done
classic one.
for that size. So all of the new ones are done basically, they knew what the dimensions were and they're drawing it for that format. And some of them, they're drawn actual size, like Superman versus the Amazing Spider-Man.
Right.
That's the size of the original art. So if you see the physical artwork from any of those pages, they're smaller than the standard comic book original art size at the time.
Because they're drawn specifically for the
Yeah,
treasure.
because
That
they're
makes
drawn
sense.
for that thing, which is why a lot of them have, big splash pages and double
Yeah.
page spreads, and they're fewer panels because you're drawing smaller. You can't really
Cram.
shove in a million panels.
I assume that means the Superman Ali was drawn specifically for the treasury, or
It was.
Yeah.
So the dimensions of that are, but I don't know how big that was drawn. I haven't seen any of those actual originals.
Speaking of originals, you still have everything from Dragon, right? Like, well, you sold some stuff, but I'm saying
I've sold some issues of it.
you have.
Generally,
Okay.
I've kept the issues together if they were together originally. There was this few issues where I would reuse pages from previous issues
Okay.
as just, hey, here's a one-page flashback to a previous issue. Then it would be, okay, well, I've now got this issue that can't be whole. It's broken up because of this thing. So let's sell those pages individually and bring them to a convention and move them. But most of the regular series I've got.
Okay.
I got a bunch of them.
Because a lot of us are craving that whenever it happens, that Savage Dragon artist edition.
AlbertMoy.com.
Yeah, Moy.
He's got a few pages from a few different things. He's got more Spawn pages than anything.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming at some point I will freshen the pot there. The thing is, I've bought myself a number of complete comics. So like I've got a full issues of Commandy, or full issues of various titles that I've got over the years. I've got 3 issues of the Hulk.
Trimpy stuff, I'm assuming?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, in fact, I've got Hulk 156. So.
Oh my God. Well, that's good to know it's in good hands, and not somewhere else.
Yeah, so that I've got the interiors and the cover. The other issues I've just got the interiors.
And then I just bought my first Kirby page, so I'm like really nervous about owning something like that, but I'm really excited to be the
it's cool.
owner of it.
It's cool. It definitely is. What'd you get?
I actually have it over here. I just got it. It's from Satan 6, believe it or not. It's a splash page that Royer inked.
Oh, Mike Royer.
Yeah.
That is quite awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Royer's my favorite Kirby inker, and like for me, that does have a little special place in my heart because it came out when I was a kid. It was towards the end of his career, and then it was like Todd inked the cover, and it's got this really nice history to it, and that splash page is just too good, and I couldn't pass it up.
That is cool.
But you've been collecting original art for a long time, right? Like that's been something that you got into.
Yeah, I had it from. Also, let's establish my house burned down in '91. So,
right.
I was collecting it before then, and I lost a bunch of original art, and then I have been buying it after then, and I've got a bunch. So there's some pages that somebody at some point is going to be trying to put together issues of something and be like, we can never find this page. It's like, well, I hate to break it to you, but
Yeah, and you have to be the bearer of bad
it's
news
gone
on that.
forever.
Was it something that you would use to trade pages at all when, like, was that a thing? Like even with
Somewhat,
your
somewhat.
image guys.
With some dealers, it would end up, hey, I can swap this for this and do a little bit of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that goes on. I mean, some artists will be like, hey, let's trade pages from things, but unless you like their work too, that can be an awkward conversation.
Yeah, you don't want to be like, well, I don't exactly like this.
Oh, I want your best Spider-Man page, but I want to give you a page from some book you don't even read. I'm like, well, no.
From All-Star Squadron.
I'm not super into that.
I won't keep you too much longer. I did want to ask, I know, so Dragon 266 is the newest issue, and then 267 is coming out soonish.
It's unfortunately what happens every goddamn Christmas time is that the printers get all backed up and they close up. So my next issue is out, I think, January 17th.
Okay.
So the next Ultimate Collection is out by the end of the year. I think it's
27.
It goes on sale the 26, 27, somewhere.
Yeah, that seemed to be the street date. But what I wanted to ask is 266. You just posted on Facebook recently that it was the all digital issue, right?
Yeah,
it was all done. Is that the first time that you've done an all digital issue?
It's the first all digital issue and probably the last all digital issue. But there are
speak on that.
Issues. Yeah, a few issues ago, I started doing some pages digitally, but not it. So it was like, I think the issue before the covers for a few issues before that were all drawn on paper. I think the issue with Mako on the cover, I don't remember the issue number, but 263, I think.
Okay.
Halfway through that issue, like the first 10 pages are on paper, and then the last 10 pages are digital. And then 64, I don't remember. God.
Like I said, memories.
I don't remember everything that happens, and I'd have to see the covers to go, oh, yeah, that one.
Right.
But like, there's one where he's fighting some chick in the snow, and he fights Samurai in the snow, and I know that the fight scene, there's like 5 pages in a row there that they're all done on paper, just because I was like, this computer stuff's going too slow. I'm going to try this. But the issue, which was backstory on Paul Dragon, the story of Paul, that cover was drawn on paper, and that whole issue was digital.
Oh wow!
So but there are still like occasional panels, like I'm pulling in this from a printed comic, and then I'm monkeying with it. So some of the lines were pen and ink at one point.
Yeah,
but that issue is all digital too. And then 27, the one that I just did, that's all on paper except for the cover. The next, I think 3 covers are all digital.
Oh.
So
did I read correctly that you I think somebody had commented, but you said it didn't save you any time. Is that?
Oh, it didn't save me any time at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, I'm actually, it turns out, pretty fast at drawing comics.
Been doing it a long time.
I've been doing it a while. And then but there's certain things that you can do on the computer that are more difficult to do than drawing on paper. Part of that was doing because that one issue was all in San Francisco, so it's like I can pull in reference photos and be able to draw over photos for some of those backgrounds. Like, oh, that's going to be a real building, and let's draw on top of that real building with straight lines. So there's that.
Yeah.
My car suddenly got to be pretty good.
Something you don't like drawing. So
Yeah, but like the issue I did, it's not really San Francisco
no.
so much. There that it's character stuff. So
Yeah. But you do on that last panel, it's just kind of interesting that it popped up with the, the homeless encampment. And it's like it's something that you've always kind of put into your books is some, current event, socio-political thing. I mean,
yeah,
they're hard to see, but I've got the Trump and I mean the Bush cover and the Obama
yeah.
cover. And it's
Well,
like
yeah,
I've always appreciated that because most people will stray away from that. And you turned Osama bin Laden into a giant kaiju. I mean,
yeah. Well, the thing is that it's super easy to get uh, preachy and
yeah.
and ham-fisted about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, that it's super because my wife and I have been watching, and don't judge me, Grey's Anatomy.
Hey,
Uh,
I watched it for a while
well,
with the
the interesting thing for me was these guys are having to deal with characters aging, and
yeah.
I'm dealing with characters aging. Let me see how they handle it.
Hmm.
Um, and just to see this play out, how the hell are they going to do this? Because
Yeah.
they've got to deal with the physical reality of actors getting older. They can't
Sure.
just go, you can't just deny that.
Yeah,
But
or replace them.
yeah, or replace them, swap in some other dude. Hey, look at me, I'm the same person.
You know.
Some of those episodes is the point that I was getting at. Is
Oh
some of
yeah.
those episodes are super political. We're making a statement about hey, Roe v. Wade was just overturned, and now people
Right.
can't get the abortion care that they need, and people are dying, and isn't this terrible? And they do it in a way which is not subtle.
Digestible. Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
subtle. It's just not. And I think that's the problem that some readers have with
Yeah.
the way some comics are written is you just read it and go, really, do you have to hit this so hard over the head? Because there's no wiggle room here. There's
Hmm.
no subtlety, and it's just no one wants to be preached to,
Sure.
you
Sure.
know. And it's
And
like I can agree with you on something, but just touch on it a little and then back
move
off
on.
and
Yeah.
leave it alone.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean,
and
there's
I try, and I think there are times that I succeed, and I think there are times where I definitely fail. Or I have to look back at it later on and go, oh well, there was no subtlety there.
well, you take your shots where you can.
Yeah,
I mean, it there's a lot, and we don't have to go into it, but there's a lot of discussion right now in the last week and change of comics and writers putting themselves in, and I'm just art is supposed to at least say something. There's a lot of times where maybe it doesn't have to, but the idea of art is an expression,
yeah,
and it's like music that doesn't have that is usually boring shit, pop, bland.
yeah,
Movies that don't have anything to say, usually the same thing. You just leave there feeling like, yeah, okay, and there are certain things that want to wipe away reality. But then at the same time, it's nice to be reminded that the person on the other end that's writing this or drawing this or singing this has something inside them, some
yeah,
fire, you know? Um, especially when it's not a hatred based fire, when it's but
yeah.
um last thing I'll ask you, I'll let you go. This is I appreciate all the time. How does it end up happening where your image gets put on the Spawn coloring book?
I
And
have no idea. I don't know how that came about.
I picked this up and I'm like, wait. this is Eric's. This
Yeah.
is Eric's pencils.
Yeah.
I just thought it was
Yeah.
very funny.
That was a weird one. I mean, that working with Todd on that was kind of weird anyway, because he inks digitally.
Yes.
So I did one issue for him, issue 199 earlier on, and I just penciled it and then uploaded it and sent it to him or whatever, and then he did his stuff. But it was weird because it was like, oh, now my original art is just these pencil pages. That's no good.
Yeah.
So in subsequent issues, I inked them all with just like a Pentel rolling writer, and then I sent those to him. So in some cases, he was keeping a lot of, my inks, and he was just adding a little toddy ticks.
Things.
So at least all those originals do have ink on them, even though they don't have Todd's actual inks on them. So that cover is like, hey, I drew that and inked that pretty much, and then you just added some stuff to it.
Yeah, and it's just, I think it's hilarious. Like, it feels like an oversight, but at the same time, it's like maybe he just did it because he really likes that image and he doesn't care. He's just like, I'll put Eric's image on it.
He doesn't draw that much anymore.
No, he doesn't.
It's been a good long time since he's drawn.
Yeah.
And what happens if you don't draw for a long time is things can fall off, and it's like, it's not like riding a bicycle where you pick up where you were and you're just the same as you've always been.
Yeah.
It's really a thing where, it's like being an athlete in a way, where you come back to it and it's like, oh crap, I'm 60 now and I'm getting out on the football field. This may not be a good idea.
Yeah. It's like,
and I think, Todd's discovering, when he has tried to do a little bit of penciling here recently, has been, oh, I don't have it anymore. So if I'm going to do something, I'll do an homage cover, and I can kind of ink over my own stuff on a Cintiq, or ink over some popular image on my Cintiq. It's like, okay,
it doesn't feel the same, but
it's not the same. But he hasn't really drawn in 30 years.
Yeah.
If you think about that, he drew the first, how many issues of Spawn?
Was 16, something like that, 13. No,
it's
more than 13.
Not as many as you think, because really early on, he was suddenly going, special thanks to Greg Capullo.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was like, Greg Capullo was doing layouts for that issue, and you were just inking those.
Yeah, and then that's basically what it was for the 4.
Yeah, it was kind of weird thinking about how I've written and drawn more consecutive issues of Spawn than Todd has.
That's right. Yeah, because
he had those guest writers real early on.
Yeah.
And then he's suddenly getting a penciler pretty shortly after that. So it was like, you didn't do that many issues in a row. I did 9.
Wow. And that, in your book you've got what, 33 issues?
Yeah, I got a few. A few. It's going to take me a while.
But just to get to that milestone, it's like, and then you'll be there. It's you and it's Jeff? No, not Jeff Smith. Dave Sim.
Dave Sim did it, and now I'm forgetting. I always do this. Somebody else has done it too. I know Stan Sakai's done a bunch, although I don't think he's as far along as I am.
Right, because he's jumped around.
Fred Perry on Gold Digger has
okay.
done 300 issues.
Wow.
And he stopped at 300.
Well, we know you're not stopping at 300.
But his was a weird one too, where he did like the first 50 issues were in black and white,
Hmm.
and then you started over with issue 1 in color, and then at some point you reverted to the early numbering. So and so
Uh,
so it's kind of a
yeah,
mess.
technically right. When your 267th issue comes out, it's actually 270. But
Yeah, but yeah, and I've regretted that since forever. But
uh,
whatever, it's 3
well, we
issues.
know it's a technicality. It's a
Yeah,
technicality.
I'm not gonna revert it to
Yeah.
that at any point, just because it's like, come on, this is ridiculous. You're too far along.
Well, I really appreciate all the time you gave me today, Eric. This is, been following your career and looked up to you for a long time, and I want to always keep letting people know about the goodness of comics. And you know, if we can find a treasure trove of these, I
Yeah,
bet you
yeah.
I could bet you I could sell a bunch of them for you.
All right.
Um, but
It's a shame, you know. It's like I wish there were a way to shove these things down people's throats when you're stuff that you're excited about, like
that's what I try to do with
you
this channel.
you
You
know,
know,
uh, there are books that I'm pretty proud of having done. Like that Herculean book you've got behind
yeah,
you.
yeah,
It's
it's
like
such a good book.
I love that thing. Um,
It's-
it was that was one where it was a super. I mean, the Herculean story that leads that thing off. Um, that was a 24-hour comic.
yeah, that's right.
So the first 24 pages in that thing were all drawn in one day.
That's amazing.
They weren't colored. They were I colored years later, but
Still,
yeah. I mean
it's a good story.
that whole book, in terms of actual hours that I spent drawing it, is not that much really. But there's something about it which is really uh, energetic, balls to the wall kind of stuff.
It's almost feels like and maybe you were inspired. It feels kind of Tarantino inspired. Like there's this conversation going on that's really back and forth, but then you realize what's going on next door. And
Yeah,
just feels kind of
that
like
was
that.
an idea that I had years ago, years and years and
Mhm.
years ago. And
Well,
it had just, I had never found a good place to use it. And then it came about that, oh, let's do this 24-hour comic. It's like, oh, I can do. And it kind of was from there was an issue of a book called The Trouble with Girls. Have you ever
right.
heard of that title?
I have. Yes.
All right. There's a bit in there where two characters are talking, and then some characters who are in a fight come crashing through, and it's just a couple of panels, and they go,
Hmm.
"Well, that seemed a little gratuitous," or something like that. And so it's this kind of me taking that idea of, let's do a story where there's two characters talking,
Hmm.
and then there's a fight across the street, but they never interact, and we never hear anything from
Yeah.
them at all, and they never address it in any way. They just are having their conversation. So it's a 24-page conversation between two characters,
Hmm.
and it looks super exciting, even though it's not all them.
Yeah. Yeah, and if anybody can find a copy, please pick it up if you find it. I mean, the reason why I think it pulled in a little Tarantino to me, it's kind of like the diner scene at the beginning of Pulp Fiction, because in that scene, Sam Jackson and Travolta are at a different table having a conversation about the pig, and then we switch perspectives at halfway through the movie, and that's when the robbery's happening from their perspective.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, so uh, yeah, I like
That was the furthest thing from my mind. I don't even know that movie existed when I
well,
don't know when that movie came out, but
No, Pulp Fiction, 92 or 93, somewhere around then.
oh, was that early? Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, I when I read comics, a lot of times, cinematically things just pop into my head because
Oh, okay.
I think a lot of good comics are written in a cinematic way. They're not maybe written to be movies, but
Yeah.
they're written in that kind of thought process. But yeah, this channel, I always try and show off books that I really like to read, and I always encourage people to seek out the things and then seek out what inspired those things to exist. And, the artists that you looked at, I tell people, like, go back and look at that. So,
That book in particular is kind of I think is a good coffee table book for people who just want to casually read comics. Like there's funny, quote unquote funnies in the back.
Yeah.
Just, one page of gags or a 4-page gag story or whatever, and it's super easy for just the casual person who's not a comic book fan to just be able to pick it up and go, oh, okay, I get it.
Doesn't require the knowledge of comics.
There's no backstory. You don't have to know anybody's origin. There's nothing of any sort, but you can read, hey, here's a dude who's got a cheeseburger for a head. What's going on with him?
That shit is so funny. I mean, like, Erik, right. Like I would love to see, more of this stuff in Between Dragon, like just funny stuff that's just easy to, easy to laugh with, because, I read this recently again the other day, just sitting on the couch, and I'm reading it. I'm laughing my ass off. And I'm like, it's not that often that we pick up a comic book and really start to laugh. So really appreciate that. And so thank you so much. Before we get going, we've got the Ultimate Collection of Savage Dragon Volume 2 coming out December 27th.
Yeah.
And then next year, January, we'll have the next issue, 267. Anything else to promote?
I'm going to continue to do comics. I mean, it'll be Savage Dragon for forever, for a while. Eventually, I'll be back to doing some more Ant. I was doing an Ant series for a while there, and I just ran into a wall. So
it's okay.
The problem with these Ultimate books is they require way, way, way too much time.
Right.
And they've got all sorts of sketchbook stuff in the back. And then there ends up being a bunch of stuff I need to do with doing color corrections on a lot of the files. And it ends up being just months of time that I don't really have to devote to this stuff. They end up being really nice looking books.
They are.
I'm super proud of them. But it's a lot of work because I don't keep my stuff nicely filed away in chronological order, so that so it ends up I get to I'm reprinting this issue to this issue. I know I've got a bunch of sketches. Where the hell are they? I've got all these boxes all over the place. And when we moved, I wasn't sitting there going, "Oh, let's put all the." It's like, oh my god, this is.
You need an art assistant, but
I need a drone so that I can just put to work, just some seat moistener. It could be over here just going through sketchbooks and looking in the backs of pages. And, but I can't even employ my immediate family to go searching for this kind of stuff because they wouldn't recognize it as, oh, this pertains to this issue as opposed to something else,
You need a comic. You need a comic nerd. You need
I need Gavin Higginbotham. I need to put him to work.
Well, hopefully, maybe we can get a clone of you or something. A second, just to do that.
You need Super Nerd to come by and be like, "Oh, I recognize this. It's just." Thank God.
Well, we'll put the call out on the channel, but and you can find Erik.
Please do not stop by the house, any of you. You'll be turned away.
You can find Erik on Facebook, and the Erik and the Savage Dragon fan group is one of those things that you're involved in, partially. But I appreciate it, and thank you for the time. And I'd love to have you back some point next year. When the new issue's out, we can revisit it because I have a lot more stuff I wanted to talk to you about. Oh, did we lose you?
I'm out of here, man. Screw
Fair
you.
enough. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Erik Larsen. I'm really honored to have him on this channel, and I appreciate his time. The interview did kind of cut off a little bit as we were coming to an end because Eric's internet kept getting a little messy. He tried logging back in, but we weren't able to just have a proper goodbye. Don't forget to buy some of his work, support the book, try and track down some of the books we looked at, maybe Herculean or Kung Fu Bible stories. They're not super expensive on the aftermarket, but they're a lot of fun, and they're really what comics are all about. So with that, don't forget to hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not. I'm going to really start reaching out to creators in 2024 to get on the channel. And don't forget, link below will bring you to my Instagram, the Discord for West Coast Avengers. But most of all, keep digging and read more comics. Uh-oh. I think we lost him. Uh-oh. All right, Erik. Well, seems that I lost you, but we were done. So I appreciate the time, and thank you.